Warm greetings and good evening. Very nice to be with you in the new year for this opportunity to discuss subject, of course, connected. Newness in the self for real this time. And it's quite amazing how we have this natural instinct to revive something at this time. Maybe nature is giving us this hint. And so it would be nice to see how we can make this, if we're making resolutions, but make them real. So today we're going to be in discussion with Mark, and Mark is based in Worthing, and there's a retreat venue on the coast. And he himself has been experimenting with Raj Yoga teachings for nearly 30 years, sharing his insights and so doing courses. And he's looking for the spiritual significance, but also the humor. So looking forward to this also. So today it's really nice to have all of you. You're welcome to share in the chat any thoughts or questions. And so I'm going to hand over to Mark, and good evening, and nice to be connected to the coast and also to this ocean of experience that you have. So warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And lovely to be with you all this evening. And also, yes, Happy New Year. And let's hope for not just hope for the best, but have an inspiring thought for that. Just checking in with you, Sarah. I believe this is a dialogue. Yes.
It is. We hear you well, so sound is good as well.
Right, great. So I understand I'm going to be sharing for a bit and you're going to ask some questions. Yeah, great. So the title, Newness for Real this time, or Newness in the Self for Real this time, the idea of that came about because naturally it's January, as everyone knows, and it's the time when people very often have, if not resolutions, but at least some thought for some kind of a change in life. In commerce, it's a new year very often, new books, etc., new hopes, and all these things. But the but is that very often inspirations don't last that long, and by the end of January, very often those inspiring thoughts are left to the wayside. So I was thinking, we want newness, everyone wants newness, and that's why we actually celebrate it and give each other's best wishes for the new year. But why not for real this time, i.e. actually bring some real change? And to give some background on that, I have fallen prey to the idea of kind of instant and great transformation. And when I say prey to it, I mean having these thoughts of unlimited possibilities and yes, I can do this, whether this is something on the physical plane, whether it's a spiritual transformation. And in thought, in planning, it sounds very feasible and practical. But my long time of application of new ideas has shown me that it doesn't actually work in the sense of instant transformation. So a bit of realism is definitely required. And I was listening to someone who was come over from Africa, a sister called Vedanti. Many of you may well have heard from her because she was here just a few weeks ago. And she was sharing her inspiration to increase the amount of time she spent in yoga. And she didn't just jump to this high figure, but she worked incrementally towards that and was very easygoing on herself. And so that kind of also reinforced this understanding that there is fantastic and amazing transformation available to each and every one of us, but we just need to move along in a realistic way, as well as maintaining the ideal as an ultimate. So that's the background to this. And you're going to have to stop me, Sarah, by the way, when you want to interject with a question. One of the things I have been especially looking at, and that's in context with the subject, if you read the blurb of it, is about especially the self, transformation or deeper change in the self. And the self, which in Brahma Kumaris is usually defined as being the soul, the subtle point of consciousness. So the idea, the understanding that each and every one of us is a living spiritual energy sitting in our bodies and performing our actions through the body. And this self, the soul, is by nature full of certain what we'll call divine virtues: purity, power, peace, love, happiness, bliss, and other such ones. And of course, if we actually experience that, then we would be on top of the world. So the idea being to really evaluate what the self is, means understand who I am as a spiritual being, and to ask the self if I deeply, sincerely, at the core of my being, accept that. And it's not asking myself to accept I am that now, but asking myself, am I that ideally, ultimately, in the ultimate truth, you could say, of the self? And certainly for myself, I absolutely accept that. But I still have to ask, and did ask myself the question, as I question myself on all sorts of things, not from a position of doubt, but from a position of exploration and verification. So, okay, I've got the academic part out of the way. I accept that I am this very virtuous by nature spiritual being. Now I look at my thoughts, my words, my actions, my general temperament, and I can see quite a big difference between that ultimate and where I am. And that's where the spiritual study comes in, to close that gap. And what I've been practicing recently is to be very gentle and yet focused. So again and again, to hold in my mind that awareness of being a spiritual being who is peaceful and powerful, etc. And when it disappears, which it does as one comes into action and interaction, to not have any worry or concern at all, but simply return to it as soon as that thought comes in mind. And I'm noticing that so long as that clear goal is there, then it's like day by day, the self is moving closer towards that. And something I became aware of quite a long time ago, but I do have to remind myself frequently, is that it's not a spiritual journey is not really a journey from here to there, as it would be on a physical journey. The spiritual journey, which is actually often referred to as a pilgrimage of remembrance, is a spiritual journey of recalling what and who you really are. And so by diving or delving deep in the self and emerge in the awareness, I am this very peaceful soul, and holding that and feeling that and resonating with that state, it becomes increasingly real. And so it's really all about the feelings of spiritual peace, the feelings of spiritual love, etc., etc. So that's the kind of starting place for newness in the self, for real this time. And one other aspect which I think is very well worth describing. I actually had a really lovely whiteboard sorted out, which I was going to use until I got kicked off the other computer because I forgot someone else is doing something. But anyway, if you imagine the soul or a point of consciousness, and this soul is in a physical body, but the soul is holding an awareness. And that awareness, for most of us, is very much connected and based upon the physical body, the life we've lived, the physical identity, personality, etc. All of our past, the story of your life. And so we hold that as a consciousness. And so the self, the soul, is operating through this consciousness, expressing and experiencing through this consciousness. And so long as I am holding this consciousness, which is a continually, a state which is in continuous update according to impressions, inner experiences, meanings I apply to whatever I experience. So that is growing. And although that consciousness I'm holding is part of the self, the soul, but it denies me the experience of my real self so long as I am trapped in that peripheral state. And yet, I can't not have it, because without it, I can't really operate in this world. So as a spiritual being, yes, I am peace, power, etc. by nature, using this consciousness, but the game which I'm playing now is to come into it, to hold it, to use it, to dance or sing, maybe not so much of that part, but do whatever I need to do through this consciousness, but then every now and again, withdraw, come out of it. And that coming out of that general so-called normal consciousness, that coming out can be described as meditation, going within, spiritual awareness. And the benefit of doing that is when I'm kind of isolating myself, the soul, then I'm able to experience myself alone as I am, without holding the consciousness of the story of, in my case, Mark. Hopefully that makes sense. And I am finding the key virtue or quality that is helping me the most is patience. Something which I was never particularly blessed with and I've had to work very hard to develop. And interestingly, it's the only one that is actually called a virtue, isn't it? Patience is a virtue. Even though peace is a virtue too, but no one ever says in ordinary language. And I suppose recognizing that the real transformation is actually simply reviving what the awareness that I really am, the awareness of the self, the peaceful, loveful, powerful being, until it starts to pull. And that's something I've noticed, that the more I go into that spiritual space, it pulls. It's like a natural pull towards that, because the feeling's so nice, and that state has been awakened inside. And so it pulls the self towards the self. I mean, it's all me. Everything I'm describing is in me, the soul, but there's these different aspects.
Thank you. Just to share what's come up here, that the beginning you were saying of this incremental, rather than expecting newness to be abracadabra. So it's like that Chinese proverb, isn't it? Journey of 1,000 miles. Starts with a single step, which is so encouraging, really, because it's also like a celebration. It needs a goal, but it is something moving, and it is getting incrementally closer. Also, like the behavioral therapists, they also suggest small resets to our rituals or daily behavior, and that feels good too. So say we are trying to conquer greed, food, eating that second slice of cake. So if that happens, if we do fall back, just a little reset that day. Example might be we choose to take the stairs rather than the lift. I mean, just taking a really gross example, but these are like little habit shifts that we can bring in immediately, rather than creating this big grand idea. We can alienate ourselves. And I really resonate as well with your gentle, focused, and what I've noticed myself, it felt a little bit similar. If I'm not experiencing those qualities and we come in and out of it, I mean, it's also connected with thoughts. So before we know it, we've gone on a thought train and ended up at a different station, and we're not feeling so. and that helps, that non-judgment thing that you brought. So it's like I'm either experiencing my natural nature or the signal to be in that natural nature, and the signal can often come more observably when I'm not feeling that peace and that contentment of the soul. It's actually radical though, isn't it? This is so, and you brought this aspect that we need to be involved. So I feel this spiritual understanding of the actor as the soul, and the role. Like right now, we're all playing a role, whatever, even if it's listening, it's a role, and we might be also involved something else. So that's the role, but the actor is separate. And I'll just share one quote which I find interesting. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "The mind, once stretched by a new idea, never returns to its original dimensions." So whether it's an aspect of what you shared, I think this is quite an experienced group here, so we've probably all had something that has awoken. We can't unlearn it. So newness is inevitable, isn't it? That we will be moving in that way, and that pull, like, can relate to that. It's like you don't want to let that go, you want to come back to it. So it'd be interesting to hear what comes up for you, how we can actually sustain it, these incremental steps. Do you have any thoughts?
I think certainly it's good to look at one's routines, because we can set a goal or aims, but along with that always comes certain routines. And actually it's something that I learned from Tony Robbins, obviously not personally, but it's something he wrote, which is the power of routines and how they reveal really whether you're going to reach where you want to get to. And as I've been looking at, for the last few years, I've been looking at this idea of working from the end backwards, reverse engineering, I suppose. I've been asking myself, what are the routines, both mental and practical, that someone would have who is very spiritually aware, as in the way I would define it from that I'm looking to re-become. So it's good to look at the routines, and certainly to reawaken or rediscover the spiritual self and maintain that. Meditation is a prerequisite. I don't think it can be done without meditation. That time which you can spend just by yourself, it's just golden. It's gold dust. Because it's, to actually, it's not spending time, it's investing time, where you get something like 10,000% interest. Just to be by yourself with some form of spiritual knowledge, some idea, just something like you said, Sarah, about the stretching. When you've had a new idea, you've stretched and you're never going to go back. But to explore that for the self. And I think that's really important as a starting place, to just decide what's the minimum meditation I'm going to give myself, allow myself. Do more, but see if one cannot do less than that. The other thing which I think is really important in the routines to maintain these incremental steps is self-observation. Some people journal, some people keep so-called a chart of progress, some people keep a diary. Everyone's different. But in some way, to keep some record of what you're doing, how you're doing, what's the result. And I keep a written record because I see really clearly if things are not going well. I just look at my time of meditation, or how much time did I spend spiritually studying and other things, and there it is in front of me in ink. That's where I slipped up, and that was the result. And if I hadn't kept that written kind of journal and record, then I can convince myself it was just unfortunate, there was no particular reason. But that's the benefit of keeping an eye on the self through journaling, through records. And it's also so good for self-exploration. I know not everyone is into journaling, but if you've never tried it, I highly recommend give it a go. Thinking on paper, someone called it. And it's a wonderful way of exploring the self. And another incremental step would be, in the morning, just choose one thing to give attention on. Whether it's a point of spiritual awareness or knowledge, or a quality you want to imbibe, or whether it's a strength, like you want to become more discerning or more decisive. then hold that in your mind and see how you can apply it. And very quickly, it's what happens to me anyway, I discover whether I've really understood what I'm trying to develop and where I need to understand more. And I also understand more clearly how much I have that quality or strength and how much more I need it. So there's some ideas.
Could you perhaps give an example of that last aspect? I think it's quite important because, we can be like a child in a sweet shop, especially when we get excited with knowledge of spirituality, and we can have a self-help book, but we might not be we're helping ourselves. We might be helping the publishers. So we can collect the information, but it'd be nice to hear maybe an example of applying one thing, and is it one thing a day, or a little bit more on that would be interesting.
Certainly. Let's take discern and decide. These are two strengths or capabilities that are mentioned in the practice of Raj Yoga as very effective and essential spiritual powers, or tools, however you call them. And I got in my opinion, and in the opinion of some others, I became extremely good, I thought, and others thought, at explaining them. But then I had a series of experiences where I realized that, hang on a minute, I'm not discerning very well, and I'm not being very decisive either. In fact, I'm sitting on the fence on a number of practical issues in life. And it hit me quite hard because I thought, well, I really know these powers. And I do, intellectually. I might be able to write a few articles on them. But that showed me clearly knowledge is one thing, but practical application, very different. And it was things like, it wasn't anything particularly important, but it was just things to do with the household. I was hesitating on making decisions on things unnecessarily. And so I realized that I had this issue with taking a decision. And as I started to explore it, I realized that the power of decisiveness is actually, it's a subtle power, and it's not a simple thing, in the sense that often we can, or keep it first person. I realized I was hesitating to make decisions because of an underlying fear and of uncertainty. And even if I'd qualified something through the discernment, means I've evaluated a situation, I wasn't able to make the decision. And the reason being was because of that fear of failure. It was fear of failure, and it was the resistance to experiencing the unpleasant emotion associated with failure. So not even failure as such, but some a very unhealthy feeling. So which you could boil down to, and I did, to a sense of unworthiness, lack of self-worth. So that really showed me that there's a lot working underneath these powers or capabilities. So my solution, well, actually, on one thing, I changed my diet a bit. That sounds a bit of a off a tangent, but I discovered that certain aspects of diet have an impact on decision making. Too much sugar clouds the intellect, and I do like my sweets. And so that's one thing. Also clarifying for the self the decisions I have to make in life. And these are not kind of top level decisions, it's just the role of life. And then also working on a deeper sense of self-respect, self-worth. Because again, we can have the understanding that is the feeling which is of maximum importance. I also did some work on the subconscious through visualization, which was very useful and effective, and I'm still enjoying doing it now, which was tapping into memories of feeling very empowered and decisive. So it's using the experiences of being decisive as a feeling and bringing it into the present.
Absolutely agree about the journaling. I know it isn't for everyone because we just all have different ways of expressing, but it's a way to capture what may ordinarily be fleeting or you might not recognize. But for me, I felt it helps me articulate afterwards the experience, and then it just raises awareness for the thoughts. It's sort of a positive spiral of awareness. And interesting, you were talking about discrimination, because when I was trying to hone in on something for this year, it was the power to discriminate that really caught. But I sort of have worked into that a bit and realized it's probably to do with experience, the contrast of when we are really in our truth and holding that space you mentioned of absolute beautiful truth of the self that is experiencing that complete security and independence and plays the part but without getting caught, etc. So that, I think, contrast is necessary. So I've been working with, it's interesting how one leads to another, and I really appreciated your process and what you came up with that's helpful for our own experiments, I think, to see how you went and where it led. There's a question here connected to how we hold this in everyday life. How to maintain total peace or these elevated feelings if you're involved in a role that calls your attention. For example, you might need to correct somebody for their mistakes. And with that self-awareness, how can we maintain that high consciousness?
Thank you for that question. Well, something I've been looking at very deeply myself for the last few months, probably a year actually, is to remove importance. In the sense of remove over too much importance to myself, which is ego basically, but also to remove importance from events, things, and other people. When I say remove importance, it's not downgrading anyone or anything. It's just kind of putting it on an even level. So if you have a position and you have to give correction, then if you reduce the importance of the role, but at the same time maintaining value for it, then it becomes easier. So you just imagine for a moment that anything, if you perceive in your mind at the moment that is coming up for you, which you have some concern about or worry, and possibly even some fear, it might be something like that for some. If we ask the question why, why do I have that worry or fear? And it's because that thing, which may be a person, it may be an event, it may be something you have to do, you have raised it up in your mind. You've given it importance over and above anything else, or most other things. And so if we very consciously reduce the importance, then we can see it more clearly and act more peacefully. Because if something is big in front of you, then you will feel, because I feel the same thing, that uncertainty, that worry, and then that triggers a more emotive reaction, and you want to speak something sweetly, or you want to speak something very calmly, but at the time, if there's fear and worry, if there's uncertainty and insecurity, it's probably not going to come out like that. So that I find that a very useful method, which I have been using a lot to see, keep the value, keep the attention, don't miss anything, but reduce importance. And I've been doing it for people, for things, for activities I'm involved in, and it's really helping.
Reminds me when I was about, I think I was 7 or 8, and I would worry a little bit. I probably picked it up from those around me, or it was in me, this habit. And I never forget, my granddad said to me, and he forgot completely, but I never forgot these words. And I traced it back to a quote. It's actually Arthur Blandford, who was a statesman in the British government. He said, "Nothing matters very much, and very few things matter at all." And it was a magic at the time. It just, because I sensed the truth in it, even at that age, and how we make, they say, don't sweat the small stuff. And otherwise the mind is often caught with usually mundane, but I think even things which appear big, when we look back in history, they are really not. But spiritual perspective, everything is small, isn't it? So it's in context to this larger picture. And then this irony that we can actually play the role better. So that has been a magical thing for me as well, to see things as small, like you might look from above, various techniques. But also this question reminds me of how, if we are connected to our primary experience, it is easier and we can be involved. So I often like the example of someone comes to the UK to learn English, maybe from Spain, and they are fully involved in their language course, but they don't forget where they're from and their family, and they're straight on WhatsApp as soon as the lesson finishes to connect back. So intellect goes there. So if we can play the part, but it doesn't mean we forget who we are, where we're from. And I think that's what this awakening is. This is one habit. If we can just put one habit in place, it's this, isn't it? This awakening. And then other things, we don't sweat the small stuff. We don't lose ourselves. We can be involved, but free. So that's, yeah.
Very beautifully described and put.
So I
really like that quotation. That sums it up perfectly.
It is wonderful. Yeah, and as a child, I never forgot it. He forgot it. And I don't know where it came from. But he obviously heard it somewhere. So, when we are becoming more aware, in these stages, we're still grasping sometimes these aspects, how to keep on top of these critical thoughts and keep that celebratory attitude, encouraging attitude, but without getting lazy also, because we might just say, oh, I'm making change, but actually we've also become careless. So, we want that balance. Or is it a balance? How to, you mentioned these words, I think, patience, you mentioned gentleness. What's your method to maintain that, but not be so gentle nothing happens?
Yes, that's a good point. Good question as well. I think it's good to have a look and see what are your each one's general main qualities or disposition. So if someone's very gentle, sweet, kind, easygoing, and perhaps a dose of forthrightness and boldness and concentration is good. If someone's a bit too kind of get out there, do it, finish it, non-stop until it's done, then perhaps they need a little bit of gentleness and calmness. So good to see what one's own disposition is. For me, I suppose I do have a disposition towards calmness and peace. Well, I do like excitement as well in that sense. But what works for me is to maintain goals on whatever it is I'm focused on physically, like I'm in this lighthouse retreat center. There's all sorts of duties I have to do. Some are as fun and entertaining as health and safety, and and others are like cooking and all sorts of things. Some are short term, some are long term, plus my own interests. And something I do is actually I nicked it off someone. It's called the 12-week year. And if you Google it online, you can get some free PDFs. I think there's a whole course on sale, but I didn't buy that. I just got the freebies. That's enough. But essentially, it was a system to, instead of doing annualized thinking, which is the tendency, here we are, January, thinking for 2023, is to scrap that and think about 12 weeks, 90 days-ish. And in that way, to see what you want to achieve, whether it's physical, personal development, because we've got different areas of interest, and also spiritual. Although you can't push and rush the spiritual, that's a contradiction. But you can still have some goals, like meditation, or you want to write something, or explore a certain subject. And so if you do that within a framework, like 12-week year, then you actually end up achieving more in that time because there is a deadline. Now, if we're thinking annually, then our deadline is basically December, which seems a long way off. So no one will really feel the need of getting into faster gear until a good way through the year. But if you're thinking in the context of 12 weeks, then it's not over urgency, but it's just an awareness that every week counts, every day counts, which it does. Of course, every day is very valuable. So that's what I use, and it helps to focus me, contain me, get measurement from it. It's very useful.
I don't know why, but my mind is going to quote every time. But
Yeah,
I really appreciate Parkinson's law, and he wrote a lot about the senselessness of bureaucracy and what he observed in a very humorous way. But that adage, which we probably all know, that work expands to fill the time allotted for its completion. So it's that whole cramming for the essay, isn't it? We've got got to get it done by the end of the month, and lo and behold, it takes us the whole end until the end of the month. So yeah, I was reviewing last year. I did a diary, like page per day, and was writing. There were goals, but it was interesting to observe the need for more of this goal setting. So that's quite nice technique. It's enough to have made some change and to have learned from it, and then to apply, and so to put something else in place. So that's quite nice. We'll definitely think about that one, or think,
Mhm.
make a plan.
When you said you were writing a page a day, you mean in the final period of the year, or this is what you're doing all year?
Yeah, so did it for the whole year, and it was a means to keep track of the progress, like you were saying. Also, practical things like how much sleep I was getting and what the activities were. So then I could also sense if what the mood was like and why, and it becomes clear, oh, there have been 5 days with less sleep, and then you just have a bit more understanding, or you see a really good routine of meditation and then you know why, things are working. Or you mentioned it's exactly the same. It somehow keeps you, and without judgment, that's the aim, because that's also part of it. Some days I just write too tired, and okay, so other days all sorts of reflections, more like it would be a diary of feelings, or it could be a points of knowledge I liked. It depends on, that's also part of it. But I sense there could be more maturity also in this, and I think the goals will be the next thing. But sometimes we're cautious, aren't we, to create a goal, and perhaps that's connected to I don't know, maybe self-respect, because we don't want to let ourselves down. But
Yes, I mean that's a very interesting area, and especially if you've made a greater part of your life spiritually orientated, and that your focus is for spiritual transformation, then sometimes it can seem that, well, how can you really have a goal within the context of spirituality? And then how important are more physical goals anyway? But I know that it is important actually to have goals in both, and also all of the practical goals we might have in practical life, be it in work or household or personal development, such as language learning, skills learning. I was kind of so prolific in personal development. I used to, still do, always have got something on the boil, or maybe not on the boil, on the on the simmer, regarding personal development, because it gives me a feeling of accelerated learning. It gives me a sense of discovery, and so I understand it's not directly spiritual, but the goal or the purpose I see is to be in my spiritual power and truth, living a very happy and effective life in practical ways.
This is an American athlete who said from his experience in training, this is David Goggins, he said, you have to be willing to go to war with yourself and create a whole new identity. I don't know exactly the context, but
Well, I know about him. I've listened to some of his stuff. He's hardcore army veteran, not for the faint ears either, when you get to hear him talking. But there's some things as you mentioned him, and some number of people may know of him, things I've picked up from him is this: he's really gone through the trenches to look at himself, and I really respect that. And he says you have to look in the mirror, do the mirror work, which means to look at yourself in the mirror, whether it's a physical mirror or just the mirror of understanding, and see there's the two selves, the one which is saying you're okay, you know, the mummy voice, he often calls it. It was all sweet and kind, and then there's the other voice which is saying you're not doing much at all. It's that kind of the reality check voice, and that need to kind of raise the volume of the reality check enough to actually get a true picture of what's going on. But on another level, I feel I feel that I find this really interesting, our attitude, well, let's back up a little bit, deeper than our attitude, our blueprint with which we are interfacing with the world determines our movement in life and how the world reflects back to us. Because although there is one big wide world, the reality is each and every one of us only knows and experiences a tiny, tiny bit of it. All of us on this call right now are individual beings experiencing this interaction in our own unique way. And whoever we know, if you think of anyone you know, you don't really know them. You know your connection or interaction with them. So it's like we're all islands with our own unique experience, and the world is reflecting back to us according to how we believe the world is. So if I believe the world is hard and harsh and bitter, and I've got to fight for every inch of ground, then it's like the world says, yes, my lord, so be it, you will fight for every inch of ground. But if I believe that the world is a lovely place and it's here for my benefit and it's here to help me and it will help carry me through life, etc., etc. I can get more poetic, but I won't. Then it's more likely the world is going to reflect in that way. But it has to be deep. It has to be a deep feeling, not just surface words, but it has to be my feelings. And the reality is, if you look at different people have such a different experience of life. So it's something I've been really exploring, especially as in this practice of spirituality. The idea is that when we really go deep inside and feel that truth and that love and that power and that happiness, etc., and we operate from such a deep place, then it's like there's the understanding the world will open up, in the sense that our life will flow and we're giving out such beautiful energy that the world's going to reflect that back.
I'm going to have to reflect on that a bit more. The one thought comes with language teaching, because I'm meeting students from around the world. There was 2 students, both from Istanbul. I know I've been there. It's a beautiful city, but
Me too.
it's hectic. I found it quite hectic, and that was 20 years ago. But one student was sharing, the challenges and the pollution, and another student was talking about as if 100% different place, as if sort of a pretty and sort of, anyway, the image that came was very different. And I wonder, we're all on a journey, and the journey is long, and some may be newer to the stage, and so they're a bit more they're getting less challenged. But the longer we're here, I think the more potential for attachments and the more challenges will potentially come. And it's not a judgment on anyone, it's just that the journey is long and spiritual understanding, and so we're also learning how to get back to our original experience, which is that everything is good. And so I've been thinking about this, and it's this Paradise Lost quote with John Milton, the mind in its own place and in itself makes a heaven of hell, or a hell of heaven. So in a way, it feels like many parts of the world, you can't deny it is like hell in a sense. I don't know that it would reflect anything positive, but my attitude, which is radical, that at the spiritual level, the soul is safe, and that at least creates an atmosphere where you can contribute, that maybe actions are also involved, but you yourself can give the healing to the other in your attitude, that you are safe even if around is a war or whatever. And I think that is perhaps the proof of spirituality, is to inside you can entertain the beautiful truth of everyone, even the outside might be different. So I don't know if it's the same as what you're saying, but
I think, sorry.
No, I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that is the same. You've given a more kind of practical demonstration of it through the way you've articulated that, and just picking up from that point, if someone's in a very so-called dire circumstances where there's lots of rough and tough and fighting and all sorts of, and very, very poverty-stricken area, but still with that, when there's that attitude, that love in the self, and coming from that spiritual space and focusing on the goodness in others, if there is that power to do it and the will to do it, then that's inviting more of the same. And so those, even if someone has a very nasty and cruel nature, but to the person who's seeing their goodness, they're more likely to trigger their whatever goodness they have in them, rather than the cruel and nasty aspect. And so the longer that goes on and the deeper that goes on, then they will be seeing an increasingly more, in inverted commas, beautiful scene. And perhaps the whole scene completely may change for them, meaning they may suddenly find themselves somewhere else. Who knows how that would work out? But certainly the awareness and the attitudes determines our life experience.
It can be very profound. And I know you've also been to Cambodia and possibly visited the killing fields, and there was that museum, there were audio guide, and it was one man's dream. He just had a dream of being safe, and it was almost like a vision of hope in his dream. And it's almost like it captured the imagination of others in a place which was so dark at the time in many ways, that whole scene. But it was something that was a catalyst, not just for him, but everyone who connected with him got to hear about just one dream, that he had. And so that was an interesting thing. So I see we've kind of come to time, but I feel like what we've arrived at is that the way the world is, we cannot change. We are playing a role which we are sort of involved with, but what we do have is this inner aim and goals and techniques, and it's so encouraging, isn't it? I think nature is pushing us a little bit into introversion this time, so it is nice to use that cue and have this discussion. But if you have anything final you'd like to share, and then if there's perhaps just a few words for perhaps guiding a meditation would be lovely. But
certainly, just to finish that train of thought, the world is in, let's call it, a very interesting state, and there's all sorts of very serious things that look like they're coming. No doubt on that. But I would really encourage everyone to deeply appreciate the power of your good thoughts, pure thoughts, loving, sweet thoughts, that even if they don't look like they're making any difference and the world is like a steamroller on its journey of destruction, instead of looking at that, look at the self, and look at anything to do with peace, of love, of happiness, etc. Because that energy is really positive and it's going out. It touches the elements, it touches human souls, and it will help to invoke something new. And I'm absolutely certain of that. So there will be challenges, but to try and keep the the mind from getting sucked into the surface shenanigans and eruptions of different kinds, and keep looking to the subtle, the love, the peace, etc. And it will work. And it's not just a hope, it's based on a spiritual principle of renewal. How long would you like me to share for?
Yeah, thank you for that image. Reminds me of an ocean, you know, it's like the surface, but and that is also a very beautiful message of spirituality. It's unlimited. So maybe a couple of minutes would be great. Thank you.
Certainly. Take a deep breath in. And breathe out, totally relaxing. Bringing your attention deeper inside, into your mind, into the place where the self, the consciousness is said to reside, the forehead. And appreciating that every thought comes from somewhere inside, even if it's a response or reaction to external stimuli. Underneath the surface, waves of thought and feeling. There is a deeper place. State of calm, peace, and deep spiritual strength. Hold that thought. I am a loving, peaceful, spiritual being. This is my truth. And recognizing I can create the thoughts I wish. So why not work now from the inside out? Stuff happens, and let me choose what I make of it, what I think, and what I express. Om Shanti, meaning I am peace.
Thank you. And also happiness and joy and wisdom as we've been exploring today. Thank you so much. It's really lovely comments and sentiments from here, also helpful, and the application. So it's nice to create this atmosphere to all use this to really go for that. What is the goal for this next 12 weeks or 12 months or 12 days? We can choose.
Yes.
Interesting. Thanks so much to all who joined, and also on YouTube, and those who listen to recording, and hope to hear your experiences. And thanks so much, Mark, for sharing time today. Enjoy the year, and we'll be connecting, I'm sure, in the coast at some point.
Certainly, yes. It'd be lovely to welcome you here. And thank you, Sarah, and for all of your sharings too, and your quotations. They're very useful. And to everyone who's been on this live, thank you for your presence.
So hoping to keep that underlying peace, whatever's going on the surface. So connect again next time. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Shanti.